Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming along today and welcome to our special book launch. I'm Ben Randall. If you don't know me already, it's my book we'll be launching this evening with Michael Brosowski from Blue Dragon. We have a special surprise for everyone who's attending this evening, but we'll get back to that a little bit later. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to write them in the chat and we'll answer some towards the end of the session. So this for me is a bit of a milestone. I've been working on this project for about 11 years now, and just the book has been the culmination of 5 years' work. It's been a long journey, and it's great to finally be bringing it out to the world. Michael's been part of the journey almost from the beginning. The week that I launched this project, it was early March, mid-March 2013. I set up the website. I contacted everybody I knew. I told them that I was doing this kind of crazy project to go back to Asia to try to find my trafficked friend, mine. And one of the messages that I received from various parts of the world was from Michael. Michael messaged to say that Mai had actually already been rescued, brought home. And while that turned out to be a case of mistaken identity, Michael's been a huge part of the project ever since. And well, I'll let Michael introduce himself a little bit better. Michael?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. And hi, everyone. Lots of familiar names in the chat there. That's great. Thanks for joining in. Hello, Switzerland. Yeah, looking at that film that you were playing at the start there, Ben, I think I looked a lot more than 10 years younger in that film.
It's
But
been a
it's
long
quite
10
funny.
years.
It really has. And it's quite funny to think how much has happened in that 10 years as well. But yeah, I do remember getting your message and thinking, oh, like this guy wants to go off and rescue some people, from trafficking. That's not a great idea. Um, at that time, Blue Dragon we'd just been doing a few rescues ourselves. We really started rescuing people internationally in 2010. We'd been rescuing people within Vietnam from some types of slavery since about 2005. But getting your message and hearing what you wanted to do, my first thought was this guy's a bit crackers. Um,
Maybe I
and
am.
I stand by that. But I mean, it's such an incredible story. Um, you know, Blue Dragon, we've got a whole system where we rescue people. Um, we've rescued about 1,500 people over the years.
Yeah, that's
Um,
incredible.
and there's a lot that's involved in that. So when an individual says, look, I want to go off and rescue these people, even though I'm heavily involved in rescuing from slavery, a part of me always says, oh, that's not a great idea. And yet, Ben, you actually did it. Um, and it's a beautiful, touching story, and it's a story very different, I think, to what most people would actually expect. It's not a story of reckless heroism at all. But it's a very beautiful story. Why don't you
Thanks, Michael.
share in your own words about this?
Yeah, so it was not something that I ever expected to get involved in, really. I was, as you were also, Michael, I was living in Vietnam as an English teacher at one point. I was up in Sapa, close to the Chinese border there, and got to know during my months there, got to know some of the local people, including quite a few of the like these teenage Hmong girls would come to Sapa in groups to sell handicrafts to tourists to try to make a little bit extra money for their families. Um, and there was one particular group of girls who sat on the corner of my street, and we, over the course of several months, we became reasonably good friends. We stayed friends on Facebook after I left Vietnam. And then these girls started disappearing. They started getting trafficked into China, which is not something I ever expected. You never really expect to be personally impacted by something like that. um, much less on, once I started looking into it, I realized that it was actually happening on a colossal scale up there. There was a huge number of young women being taken from Vietnam into China. And yeah, it was a bit of a journey for me. I didn't immediately think, okay, I'm going to put my life on hold and I'm going to go back and see what I can do. There was a bit of a thought process behind that. But eventually, yeah, I decided that what I wanted to do was to go back and see if I could help my friends, because it didn't seem that they had any other support at that time. Um, so that's how I got involved in all of this.
Yeah, and that personal connection really resonates with me. So even though, I'm talking as a representative of Blue Dragon Children's Foundation, and we're an established NGO. In fact, we started rescuing people also for quite a similar reason. That very first rescue that we did of a girl who had been trafficked outside of Vietnam was was a girl who we knew, um, and she called for help, and we didn't know what to do. She didn't really know where she was, so we just went searching and found her. But the same as you, it was a personal connection. And Ben, I assume that you had that same experience of hoping somebody could find your friends, but actually you were in the position to go and look for them. So you made that decision to go yourself, right?
Yeah, I realized that, a lot of people in Supper, most of the local people there, have it pretty tough. They don't have a lot of spare resources. They can't really just drop everything, to go looking for, their daughters or sisters or cousins when they go missing. Um, and having been, a foreigner living in Sapa, like I knew the area, I knew the people reasonably well. But I also had that extra advantage that, I did have the luxury of being able to stop what I was doing and to go back and to see if I could help. Um, and I did have, fortunately, I had like the contacts who could support me in doing that, because I was also starting from a place I didn't have a lot of resources either, but I did have, a lot of friends, who were willing to help out.
Yeah. And it certainly doesn't go past me that here we are, two white guys talking about rescuing Vietnamese people, um, which in one way is not a great look. Shouldn't we be empowering local people and so on? Um, and the answer to that, first of all, is that actually that is certainly what we do. Um, but being white guys, being foreigners in a strange land, in some ways is an advantage because we're not held by the customs, where people would say, well, that's what happens to the girl, so that you just have to accept that. And you found some of that attitude, right, as you were looking for your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a tricky thing to be involved with. Obviously, a white guy trying to help out, and now trying to tell like an Asian female story, essentially. Um, so there are some, um, sort of tricky, tricky issues to negotiate there. And one thing about this story that makes it quite unusual, I think, is that, um, first of all, I didn't really go back to rescue anybody. I just wanted to help my friends, and that was, regardless of age, gender, race, whatnot. Um, so it wasn't really, this gung ho mentality of, wanting to go and do something crazy or much or whatever.
Yeah.
But the story that, ended up coming out of that ended up being a sort of, I guess, a kind of subversion of the traditional sort of this white savior sort of narrative, in that I, in the end, I didn't really actually do much personally. I ended up being more, the storyteller, and and witnessing these girls doing amazing things for themselves. And all the incredible things in the story were done, mostly by local people, which I think is amazing.
Mm. Yeah, Ben, having read your novel, you certainly don't come across as a white savior. In fact, one of the really beautiful things about your storytelling is the depth of self-reflection that you go into. And you talk very openly about your mistakes, uh, times where you misread a situation, far more, I think, than most writers who I've ever encountered. Do you want to share a little bit about that experience of writing as an outsider?
Well, the whole experience for me was a very complex one. First of all, the human trafficking. I didn't have a background in human trafficking. I didn't really have any particular education or experience. So I was really coming in on the ground floor there, as you know, being the person who guided me through most of it. Um, but also, yeah, with the different cultural groups, the Hmong people, the Kin Vietnamese people, the people in China that I dealt with, there were a lot of um, cultural things going on that weren't always what they seemed to be at first sight. So there was a lot of like trying to unpack like what's actually happening here. Why is this person behaving this way? You know, and trying to understand. Um, and our documentary, Sisters for Sale, actually ended up winning a particular prize. I think it was over in Italy because we were awarded this prize specifically because they recognized the fact that we'd gone to a lot of effort, not just to like condemn the traffickers, but to actually try to understand what was happening and try to like peel back those layers, understand what was going on.
Which award are you talking about there, Ben? Because I know you've been shortlisted for a prize, right? Is that the one that you mean?
No, that's a different one. So yeah, a couple of years ago, my writing was shortlisted for the Richell Prize, which was an amazing honor. There were over 850 Australians um, competing,
Yeah,
and I didn't win, but I made the top five, so I'm pretty happy with that one.
I think you've got to be pleased with that. So, yeah, so I find that that level of the self-reflection in your story, the self-discovery, to be very, very human. It has a very natural, authentic touch. Just exactly the same as sitting here talking to you, actually. There's no pretense there. And that's something really beautiful about the story. And you said that you went into it not sort of not knowing anything. You didn't have a background in human trafficking. That also resonates with me. Um, for I'm not sure there may be some people on the call today who don't know this part about the Blue Dragon story, but we also started here in Vietnam basically with no background in what we were doing. So we started out helping street kids in Hanoi, and we still do, nearly 20 years later. And then later on, started getting involved in rescuing people from human trafficking. But in both instances, we were just the people on the ground seeing a problem and saying, "Hey, that's not right. Someone's got to do something about this," and realizing that we were the someone. In fact, before Blue Dragon began, uh, I didn't. I'm speaking to everyone today from Hanoi. I never intended to live in Hanoi. I wanted to live in Vietnam, but in the south, in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. Um, And so, I was here in Hanoi, meant to just be here temporarily. And there were all of these street kids around. And what I was doing was contacting other agencies saying, "Hey, look, there are all these street kids in Hanoi, and there's really no one helping them. Could you help them?" And of course, people would say, "Look, we'd love to, we're concerned, but we don't have any network in Hanoi, or we don't have any funds to do that." And eventually there was kind of a dawning that um, here I was saying, "Hey, I'm concerned about this problem, so you should fix it." And in fact, well, if I'm concerned, I should fix it. So I think the Blue Dragon story really parallels your own journey, Ben.
There's a quote I have right at the start of the book actually, which is it comes from Calvin and Hobbes actually, and it's the kind of thing that it happens to somebody else, but we're all somebody else to somebody else. Uh, and talking about the complexity, I mean, one of the things that I realized getting into this kind of situation, not only is human trafficking itself incredibly complex, and there's all these cultural layers to peel back, but the trafficking situation is constantly changing too. And you've been there long enough to see all kinds of changes. So, I mean, where are you guys up to now?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would add that human trafficking globally changes constantly. In every country, the traffickers are constantly outstripping law enforcement or outstripping the laws. So today, Blue Dragon is in, quite an unexpected position. We're doing a lot of rescues right now from Cambodia and Myanmar, even from Laos, which was unthinkable even a year ago. Um, and I think most people who are on this call would have heard about these scam centers, online scam centers, where, when you get those text messages or emails from people or phone calls sometimes, basically trying to set you up and trick you out of money. Very, very often, the people who are doing that, who are making those calls, who are emailing you, they are in slavery. So they have been tricked and taken to these places, which are very common in Cambodia and northern Myanmar, in the northern states, the Golden Triangle. But they're also popping up in Laos, and I'm hearing about them in other countries as well, around the region and around the world. So those people, if they don't scam you, then they are punished. Um, we're hearing about people being killed, people having their organs taken, uh, really, really violent stuff. Um, so the world of trafficking has really gotten much worse, I would say, in the last couple of years. Um, we're hoping to see that turn around. We're hoping that international pressure on various governments will cause them to deal with this, to confront this problem. But right now, though, I read a UNODC report just recently that says that in Cambodia and Myanmar alone, there are about 250,000 people in this kind of slavery, in these scam centers.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, and on top of that, you know, there are girls and women in brothels, especially in northern Myanmar, which has just in the last couple of weeks really descended into a war zone. Now that hasn't been in the news very much, I think, because there's so much going on around the world. Um, but but there's an armed conflict right now between the Myanmar junta and rebel groups in these same areas where Vietnamese girls, women, and boys and men as well are being held in slavery. So the situation there has constantly shifted. And if we come back and have this call again in 6 months, honestly, I can't imagine what the situation will be there because it's just so fluid. Um,
They like to
so
keep you
as
on your
well,
toes.
absolutely. Well, this is not a field where you get bored. Um, so at the same time that we're doing these rescues, and Blue Dragon is probably best known for that rescue work. But in fact, the really, really interesting thing about what we're doing in these last couple of years is we're starting to get really good at how to prevent human trafficking. So we're working in a few rural areas of Vietnam, and we're kind of trying out this model of intervention to stop it before it happens or to respond quickly as soon as it happens.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
so what, yeah, and we're seeing really good success there. And that prevention side, we're now talking about a 10-year window where we say, well, if we can prove this model and scale it up and get the government's buy-in of it, the Vietnamese government's buy-in, then we can really see potential that trafficking would finally start to drop off.
Yeah, and
You
that's
know,
so important. I mean, one thing I realized in the course of the events of this story is that, yeah, you can rescue a girl, but the girl that you rescue isn't going to be the same girl that was taken. I mean, once a girl has been trafficked, her life becomes so complicated. There are not necessarily very good options left for her. And I know you guys
mm,
do a fantastic job of, bringing the girls back and reintegrating them as best you can and giving them all kinds of support. But obviously, the ideal is to prevent it. So it's fantastic that you're really taking that
Yeah.
seriously.
Well, Ben, why don't you share about what you saw when these girls came back, or um, two girls who had returned from human trafficking? What did you see their lives were like afterwards?
Yeah, so I was in a very privileged situation, I suppose, of sort of seeing firsthand, up close, one of my friends who came home. Um, while I was there the day she came home, I was there with her for the months that followed, and so I really got to see the process. And she had the option of, as you know, she had the option of having assistance from you guys, and she chose not to take that, which didn't help her case. But she was in a very difficult situation in that these girls are from very traditional societies, where there are unmarried virgins and there are married women, and there's not a lot of place for any other kind of woman. And coming back from China and not fitting into either category, she had a very hard time fitting back in. There was a lot of judgment from her community. Uh, Her return home had followed this horrible decision that took months of what to do with her child that she'd had in China. Um, she'd had this horrible choice to stay with her rapist in China for the sake of staying with her baby girl, um, or coming back to her home and family in Vietnam, at the cost of never seeing her baby girl again. And she ultimately decided to come home. But I mean, the whole process from being taken initially and everything that she went through to leaving her child and coming back to a community that was not accepting of her return, that was very judgmental, not really understanding at all. I mean, I could see that there's plenty of work for you guys to do there.
Yeah, and actually, you raise a really good point about going beyond the rescue narrative, that it's just a matter of someone in trouble saying, "Hey, get me out of here, help me," and then someone rushes in and saves them. You talked about one of these girls had an option to be helped by Blue Dragon, but said no, right? Now, how does that make sense? Why would somebody in trouble say no to someone helping them? But there's such depth of human complexity in the decision making that people have to go through. Having children while they're in slavery impacts on their decision, or a fear of what happens when I return. And you saw that, right? The fear of, if I return, will I be accepted?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the reason why she chose not to take that assistance, is because she didn't want anything that would mark her as any more different. She was just like, I'm going to fit in as best I can, which I think ultimately didn't turn out to be the right choice, but it was a choice she made.
Yeah, that's quite right. And again, coming back to your novel, something that I really appreciate in reading it is that you do go beyond this kind of saviorism idea to sharing about respecting people's decisions. And you were there for your friends, but you also let them know that if they didn't want your help, that was also okay. You were still their friend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whatever these girls chose, it had to be their decision. I was very careful, not to sort of push them one way or the other throughout that process, because I didn't necessarily know what they felt was best for them, or what was ultimately best for them, because with all the cultural complexities there. Um,
Yeah.
And I mean, just the fact that these girls have been in a situation for years where they've been denied any autonomy, where they've just been denied any freedom of choice. And I mean, what I was there for really was to give them that choice. So it would have been hypocritical for me to sort of pressure them in their decisions.
And we touched on that a little bit before, Ben, but do you want to share more about the challenges of writing about this as being that outsider, um, getting involved, and then somehow trying to tell the story. What is it like writing about that experience?
Yeah, it's been challenging. I think this is the most complex story I'll ever write. It's well, I mean, the fact that it's taken me years to get to this point, and not just to write the story, but to figure out a way to write the story. And some people have asked, you know, well, why don't these girls tell their own stories? And that's a really good question. And part of it's just practicalities, the fact that you know they're illiterate and they don't have the time, or you know they don't have those freedoms to tell their own stories. But more so, it's a sort of a cultural thing again, where they don't feel comfortable. They're kind of shamed for telling their own stories. So I was in this really unique position where I'd known these girls previously, and they felt comfortable with me, and they shared their stories with me, and they gave me permission to tell their stories. And so I really felt the responsibility was on me to tell their stories in as respectful a way as I could.
Mm.
And sometimes it was a bit tricky. You know, there was a bit of a balancing act there because there were a lot of factors that came into play. But I think what I've come up with is the best I can do.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, you mentioned that, and I'd like to add to what you've said there. In Blue Dragon's work, we're rescuing people from slavery. We're also meeting homeless kids on the streets of the city and helping them to turn their lives around. And often their stories, I wouldn't consider them to be particularly like controversial or sensitive. It might be kids who run away from home because of some problem, or kids who just ended up going looking for a job and ended up homeless. But I find that even they are quite resistant to letting people know their story. And there's a cultural difference there between what we in the West, we look at that and say, well, what a success story. Look how far you've come. That's fantastic. But to that Vietnamese person, the fact that they were homeless at one point, or the fact that they were in slavery at one point, may be a source of great shame. They don't want people to know how far they've come. They only want people to think that they've always been fine. And so they may really struggle to tell their story. Um, I get that same question as you. Why are you telling their story? I keep a blog, for example, and I'm going to give it a shameless plug, lifeisalongstory.com, where I tell the stories of these young people. Well, why aren't they telling the stories themselves? Very often they're afraid to. So in Blue Dragon, on our social media, on my blog, we've got to change people's names. We've got to use non-identifying photographs, even when it's a story that somebody would look at and think, well, that's an amazing story. This young person is a hero, but that doesn't mean they want to be identified. And I'm sure in the writing of Sisters for Sale, that must have been a real struggle for you to work out how to navigate through that, right?
Yeah, they're very difficult stories to tell. First of all, to get that kind of access and to have victims and survivors feeling comfortable and willing to share their stories, but also that the complexity of those stories makes them very difficult to tell in a reasonable way. Um, and the blog is fantastic, by the way, and I'm still waiting for your book.
Keep waiting. It'll happen one day,
Yeah, I
but
hope so.
I just need some time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The power of storytelling. Well, Ben, congratulations on the launch of this book. When is it coming out?
Today's the day.
Okay. Do you want to give yourself a shameless plug? You're not very good at promoting yourself, Ben. So you need a prompt. Um, do you want to tell people how to get hold of the book, what to do?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we have a little special surprise for everybody who's come along today. So we're actually going to send you all a copy of a digital version of the book for you to read. If you'd like to get your hands on a paperback or a hardcover, we're publishing this one in hardcover for the first time, which is fantastic. We have those available for sale also, and obviously that really helps our work, so we appreciate that support. We've had some technical issues with our website recently. So we've actually just set up a separate online store where you can get your hands on those books. It's at store.sistersforsale.com. So you can head over there and get yourself a copy if you like. It's, for whatever reason, everything's in Australian dollars. So if you're not in Australia, don't be too put off by that. You pay in your own currency. It's fine.
Yeah, fantastic. And good luck with it. I really hope that you get that message out there. It is a wonderful story, and it's a very much a story of self-reflection and growth, and learning about this issue.
I
And
certainly learn a lot during the process. Yeah.
sure. And there's a lot to learn from your writing. So I hope it goes brilliantly well.
Thank you. And as you pointed out, I'm not a great self-promoter, but I've over the past decade, I've absorbed a lot of human trafficking stories, and I'm sure you've absorbed even more, in every format. And I really think this is unique. I mean, I haven't seen another human trafficking story like this one. A lot of them you see, they're very simplified. You get, the victims and the villains basically, or sometimes you'll hear the survivor story. Sometimes it's very statistical. But I don't think there is another story like this one out there. So you might have seen the film, you might have seen our documentary Sisters for Sale and think you know what's happened, but there's a lot more to it than that. We've got Katie here, who I think is going to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the questions that we've gotten is what's next for the project. This project's existed for it's over a decade now, and what's been the journey and what is the future journey for the project?
That's a good question. This project was originally started. It was supposed to be a 6-month project. It's been about 10 years and 6 months now. So I didn't expect it to come this far. I've been wanting to focus on the book. I didn't want to talk too much about what the next thing is. I didn't even want to think about the next thing just yet. But I think we're going to start looking at doing a graphic novel adaptation of the same story, to get it into high schools, to write for that kind of audience, spread a bit more awareness.
I'd love to see that, Ben. I hope that works out.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. I think maybe another question that we have is just, what was the process in writing this book? How does it tie into the other books that we have? There's something new we can learn? Like, talk a little bit more about the process.
Yeah, so this story has had a very long journey. So as some of you all know, we released the documentary first. We released the documentary in 2018. But it's essentially a 5-year story. And to tell it in 90 minutes really didn't do it justice. There were so many fascinating parts we just had to cut completely, and others we had to skip over very, very briefly. And I was actually approached in early 2018, even before the film came out. There are five major publishers in the world, and one of them approached me, said, "We've heard about this story. We'd love to do a book together." And at that point, I started writing, and we continued chatting about, what the book would look like. And there were a couple of realizations. The first one was that the book was going to be a lot longer than expected. I was keeping my writing pretty tight, trying to keep out anything extraneous, but it was still going to be a very long story. And also, I realized with this publisher that we had different books in mind. So we ended up stepping away from the publisher, and as some of you know, we self-published a series of 4 books, which is what this story ended up being. So what's in this book now is essentially, if you've read those 4 books, it's that story condensed. Because I realized that not everybody is going to want to pick up a series of 4 books to get to the end to find out what happened to Mai and Pang and how it all turns out. So it's essentially that story condensed to about 30-something% of its original length. And, you know, it was a long process trying to cut it down that much. Like, it was quite a brutal cutting process. But I think in the end, the story is only stronger for it. So if you have read the other books, the story will be familiar. But if you haven't read the other books, this is a fantastic place to start.
That's awesome. How can people get involved? You know, can either of you talk to, you know, if someone who's not directly involved in, you know, what you do, Mike, Michael, and Ben, what you do with the Human Earth Project, what someone's foot in the door for if they want to do more?
Michael?
Yeah, thanks. It's a tricky question because, you know, Ben and I and lots of others like us are out there talking about the importance of dealing with this issue. And yet it's not something where you can, like, I can't say, look, hop on a plane and come over and we'll send you off on a rescue operation. You know, it doesn't work like that. So it can almost be a bit frustrating for people who want to help um, and want to get really hands-on. But there are things you can do. And, you know, the starting point is always with educating yourself. That's where, you know, Ben's book is great, my blog, you know, and there's so much out there about human trafficking. And there are many forms of human trafficking. So, you know, get knowledgeable about it, but then start where you are. So if that question is coming from somebody in Australia, see what there is right there in Australia that you can do. And, you know, that could be in, like, getting involved in Blue Dragon in Australia, you know, when we have events and so on. Or it could be volunteering with an organization that has an operation there in Australia. So always look locally to see how you can just make a start. Don't feel that you need to, you know, get on a plane and travel around the world to help out. What do you reckon, Ben?
Yeah, it is a tricky question. I handed it over to you because I know you've answered it more than I have, and you did well. Um, you know, of course, you know, we're both operating non-profit organizations, so, you know, money always helps. And otherwise, it's, you know, it's difficult to know what to tell people, really, because it can be a difficult issue to engage with and really to sort of become proactive about. But the people who are out there sort of trying to do something already always appreciate your support. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that touches on a really good point as well, that a lot of people think that this is an issue that isn't touching base in, you know, maybe their home country, but this is something that, you know, we need to look at from a global perspective. So that's a really good point. I think, you know, thank you both for answering these questions. We had some good questions in the chat. Is there any, I guess, any closing thoughts, or, you know, Mike, if you want to speak to any wrap up, and toss it to you, Ben?
Look, from me, I would say those, you know, those questions there about how can we help. Um, even though I'm saying, you know, start locally, I do agree with what you've just said there, Katie, about you know, also be thinking globally. And there are ways you can get involved, lots of different ways. Everything from, you know, every September Blue Dragon has a walk, you know, around the world. So I know there's Craig on here who's from APT in Melbourne, you know, and he's out there organizing a walk in Melbourne each year, and that the same walk happens in different cities around the world. You know, getting involved even at that level is helpful. Ben has mentioned about, you know, donations help, money helps. If you're in a position to donate to a project like Ben's or to Blue Dragon, fantastic. But, you know, find your way in. I think everyone who's joined this call has joined because they're concerned about this issue. You know, they're interested in this. Um, don't walk away and do nothing, even if it's just starting out by reading Ben's book or following up online, or getting involved in the Blue Dragon Marathon walk next year. There are just so many ways to be involved. And absolutely, we do need your help. This is not something that Ben or I are going to solve on our own. It needs a global effort. So I appreciate the chance to share that thought, Katie. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along, to showing up, because I mean, it is an issue that, you know, it's a strange issue. It's a tricky one to engage with sometimes. But at the same time, it's this enormous global issue that, you know, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in every country. And really what we're doing, you know, it needs to be done, you know, and it's making a difference. So thanks for coming along and being part of it. And thank you, Michael, for it's been fantastic having you here.
Yeah, pleasure to always good to talk to you, Ben, and I love to see how things are coming along for you.
Thank you. And for those of you who do want to get your hands on a copy of the book, if you order them now, we'll get them to you by Christmas. And as I said, that all makes a real difference for us. So thank you very much.